Did I make you a co-host?
Oh, yeah, I do have something to share.
Okay, no big thing. There you go.
All right, thanks. I am going to ask before I start sharing stuff, how many of you have been to any of the open houses related to this project? I know Georgia has seen this.
I'm a junk.
I hope you don't get sick of it. Okay, Katie, you've seen this.
I learn something every time. It gets
Okay.
better every time.
Okay,
Great.
which project?
I am going to show you. It is the Nature Play and Deboer Waterway project. And I'm here, I work at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. I live in the Congress Park area. And I have the distinct pleasure of being both the volunteer director at the museum and getting to work on this project because I don't know, I guess they know how much I love the outdoors and I have a 7-year-old. So that I got chosen and it feels like one of those dream projects. Can you all see my screen okay?
Yeah, and could the rest of you please mute yourselves?
Okay. So the project I'm here to talk with you about is the Nature Play and Deboer Waterway project. This started out as Nature in the Park is what it was originally called in the City Park Master Plan update. The Deboer Waterway component was added based on community feedback. We heard during we've been in community engagement now for 2 years. We're going on our 3rd year of community engagement to help shape the design of the project. And by and large, it was more than 90% of people of all ages told us that they really wanted water to be incorporated as part of this project. So the intent is to create accessible spaces that are multi-generational, multi-sensory, and that there is respite and play based on Colorado's 8 ecosystems. And the intent is to encourage curiosity, wonder, learning, exploration, discovery, all the good things that happen when you're in nature for people of all ages, people in groups, people that are solo, to give spaces for people to feel immersed in nature inside of our city park. So I'm gonna just walk you through this presentation, and inside the presentation there are some preliminary concept sketches. We do not have a design yet. We are working on a concept design, and we'll talk about that a little bit. I just wanted to start out too and say the reason that the museum is at the table on this project is that we are considering this a mission-driven project. Our role is to ignite the community's passion for nature and science. And we are not gating anything off. We're not taking over the park. This is a 100% gift to the people. And because it's a gift, we want to make sure that we're giving a gift that people want. We certainly don't want to spend a bunch of money and then give people something that they don't like. So it's been really important to us to listen to the community and get feedback so that we don't just spend money to create something people don't love. We have Denver Parks and Rec is working with us on this project. This is a 50-50% cost share between Denver Parks and Rec and the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. And I think you're all aware of Denver Parks and Rec and what they do. When I'm out in the community, sometimes people aren't fully aware, but I'm pretty sure you're all aware. Like I said, community is at the heart of this project. On this slide, you can see the other folks that we've contracted with. The museum has contracted with all of these different firms to help us create the infrastructure for the waterway, and we'll talk a little bit about that, and the natural play spaces and the landscaping, of course. So this is what it says about this area in the City Park Master Plan update in 2018 when that got updated. This explains the genesis of the project. It will be ecologically diverse. We are not going to touch the pinetum. So it does say that the pinetum is in this, in the recommendations for the City Park Master Plan update, but we have clearly heard not to touch the pinetum. We will not be touching the pinetum. And we will not be touching the South Meadow as part of this phase of the project. Now, the South Meadow has been concepted at a high level from Denver Parks and Recreation to be a pollinator garden, but that is not what this project is working on, just because we need to limit our scope based on funding. So this is the area that is scoped for design of nature play and a restored waterway. And you can see it kind of goes all the way down to the lake edges. And that's because we're going to create some wetland filtration, so some non-chemical filtration that will draw water up from the lake system and clean it as it goes through the waterway. And we'll talk a little bit more about how that works in a minute here. We are right here where the star is. Like I said, we've been working on community feedback for a couple years. At first, the museum's touch on community feedback was a light touch, just trying to figure out if this was really what people wanted. Sometimes, we see things that are recommended in a plan, and we want to make sure that it's truly what people are recommending and it's not just written into a plan. So we wanted to reach out a lot before we put any money on the table. And then in 2019, we entered a formal partnership with Denver Parks and Recreation and said we would put money on the table and help lead the design. And the agreement was that the museum would lead the design of the space, because it was really fundamentally important to us that the design is reflective of the community's wishes and hopes and desires and dreams, and isn't just a design that's created for people, not by people. So we're working on gathering up some preliminary concept design feedback right now. And then in late March, early April, we will have a final concept design available for community review. So it's basically did we hear you? Is this what you said? Here's all the data that we've gathered. This is the design that was created, and just truth checking that design before we create design documents in a schematic design. So here are the design principles that have been told to us over the course of these last couple of years. That I noted that people wanted that restored waterway, and that people want to use the space either solo or in groups, and that the experiences need to be authentic and natural and playful, and for people of all ages and abilities. So it's fully accessible space, and that there will be some traditional play elements embedded within the natural framework. So when I say traditional play elements, I mean swings and slides. And that is because this is replacing the small playground that exists already in that area. So this is the replacement playground. We will be really mindful about how those traditional play elements are immersed within the landscape and don't disturb the landscape. We also added to this kind of the community-driven design principles, we added some additional design considerations. And that is that we are going to continue to make sure that all the trees that are there are healthy and preserved, and we will add shade. So we'll add more trees, more shade structures, because we have heard people tell us that it needs more shade, that people are drawn to shade. There is the need for us to follow that historic design intent. We have the design parameters for anything that happens in City Park in mind. And I understand that the Deboer waterway and Box Canyon was a reflection of bringing the mountains down into the city. And that area will continue to be a mountainous landscape within the city. And we'll build upon that by building out the 8 ecosystems of Colorado around it as reflective of the 8 ecosystems of Colorado. So we might not be able to necessarily transplant alpine tundra or something like that, but we will have reflective plant selection. The plant selection is being guided by Denver Parks and Recreation alongside Denver Botanic Gardens. And I think probably most of you know this was the original Denver Botanical Gardens design area. back in the 50s. And so I've reached out with Denver Botanic Gardens, and Denver Parks and Rec is going to work with them to make sure that the plant species we select are appropriate, that they'll live in the in City Park, that they'll be able to thrive in City Park, and that they'll be tolerant to kind of the use that we would expect to see in a city park. You'll notice that there's innovation and environmental stewardship as part of our design principles. And what that means is when we are restoring the waterway that you see here, this is an image of the Box Canyon. I'm not going to promise that there's a bridge over the Box Canyon. This is a just concept sketch. But when we are restoring that waterway, we will be doing it with, so here's another image without a bridge over the Box Canyon, just so you know, it's not a solid yet. The waterway will be restored using a series of wetland filtration systems that will filter the water naturally, so we won't be using chemicals to filter the water. And the water will get cleaner and cleaner as it passes through the wetland. So we could talk more about this if you want in a little bit. I can always come back to it or dive deeper. The one thing I do want to mention with the waterway is that the lily pond itself, the recommendation was to restore the lily pond. That cannot be done in a way that is economically sensible or environmentally sensitive. The restoration of the lily pond to hold water would have to reline the whole bottom of the lily pond, and to do that, they would have to probably disturb the stonework. So this is a concept sketch of the stonework being preserved and then filling in the lily pond a little bit more and creating pathways where the stonework is planting stonework for a pollinator garden throughout that space. In addition to making sure that the waterway is non-chemically treated, there is a nod to wanting to make sure that we can use as much power from alternative energy sources as possible. So we're thinking that there'll probably be 2 pumps to pump the water through the spaces. And what you see here on this image is a shade structure that has photovoltaic cells on the top of the shade structure to help power those pumps. This is another image of what it might look like to immerse play within a natural landscape. Just to give you an idea of what that might look like. And then this is that same area, just kind of constructed a little bit differently with different sorts of play and rest areas within the space. So just a lot of different options for what to do based on people's feedback. This is an image of you can see in the foreground there some seating, some natural seating. And then you can see in the foreground there some ways that some shade might be created while we wait for trees to grow in. You know, it takes a while for the trees to grow in. So we're considering all options for shade that are architecturally appropriate and submissive to the landscape. We just finished up a design feedback process where for about a month we had out for gathering design feedback, all of the play features, water experiences, gathering spaces that people would like to see in the area. And I think that's it. We had some really cool things. We had a take home kit. So we mailed kits out or dropped them around town. We had 500 kits that we dropped around town or mailed out to people. And I think 700 people took an online survey that we had. And then of course, we've been coming to meetings to talk with folks. So I think I ran through that really fast. I think I've said this maybe 12 times now at this point. Georgia, like Georgia says, it's different every time. I also have dinner making happening in the background, so I apologize for residual noise. What kinds of questions do you have? Was that too fast? Yeah, the people who've seen this before
Can
say
I
no.
just say, I come to these things and everyone knows by now, I am such a Jacqueline Altreuter fan that it's beyond belief, because I've been to so many citizens feedback workshops where no one cared what I thought, and it was a waste of time. And this young lady, in partnership with Peggy Day before she retired, has started a process that I would actually like to document so that it's clear how they formed this process that is so receptive to the public. And other institutions could make use of what they have done that has been so successful. I'm just, I kept waiting for a while. Now I'm just completely sold, but I kept waiting for, oh, something's not gonna, be receptive. These guys, the receptivity to the public and the different ways of finding out what different age groups want, and it's been such a thorough process. It's been thrilling to me, and I'm also thrilled and would like to know, Jacqueline, did you make the contact with Denver Botanic Gardens? How did that partnership, which I happen to know DPR was resistant to in the past, how did that take place, and how deep is that relationship?
I did reach out to Denver Botanic Gardens. I reached out to their, oh my gosh, she's one of their curators. Her name's Becky. She worked on the Chatfield project and all of the, she does some restoration work in the Chatfield area. I reached out to her to talk with her about the project as a restoration project, and then asked who we should be in contact with. Denver Parks and Recreation, when they realized that that this was a really important aspect of the project to get Denver Botanic Gardens involved. That Julie from their greenhouse, I cannot remember Julie's last name, but Julie is working with
At City Park.
At City Park.
Yes, okay.
Is working with the horticultural team over at Denver Botanic Gardens. And that seems like the appropriate fit for people working together.
It's a thrilling development, I think.
Cindy has a question.
Hi, Cindy.
Oh, hi there. Let's see. I can unmute I can maybe just 1 second here. Anyway, I'm very excited about this, and I think it's exciting. I represent Washington Park, and right now we are, well, first of all, let me say your process is extraordinary. We were very, very pleased with our new large playground with a natural setting, and the Parks and Rec department were wonderful about preserving and protecting our trees, which was number one, and incorporating it into the historic structure of the park. So I'm glad to see that collaboration, and I think it's very important. I was wondering a little bit about two things. We also have a Deboer area in our park, and it is called the Lily Pond. And it's just on the east side of the Evergreen Hill, which is on the north side of Washington Park. And at the time, we actually had probably 10 years ago an approved landscape plan by Parks and Rec, but never came to fruition. I was wondering a little bit about the background that you used to explore. How did you take the concept, and what concept did you take for the Deboer Canyon? What historical information did you gather?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm so happy to hear, Cindy, that that your partnership with Parks has been good. Our partnership has been good with Parks. I want to say that the people I work with in Parks are amazing. The processes that exist systematically in Parks are broken, and not completely, but pieces of them need some tooling, I would say, and some tweaking. And the parks people, the people who work in Denver Parks and Recreation that I've worked with, have been really receptive to trying to figure out how to do their processes differently. So that has been, it's been a good partnership with them for us, and hopefully for the community too. And hopefully, some of this is being documented, and there will be different ways of reaching out to the community in the future. But it sounds like that went well with Wash Park. For the historical context for the Deboer Waterway, we leaned really heavily on our community. So, there are people on this call and then people out in the community that have a lot of historical knowledge. It also helps that the museum and City Park grew up together. And so all of what's happened in the park is archived within the museum's archives, because it's basically it's the backyard of the museum. And so anytime something happens in the park, there are photos, and they actually get put in the museum's archives. So we have a lot of history. Our archivists, Chris and Liz, they're now archivists emeritus, have a long standing knowledge and history of City Park that was filled in actually by all of the community members that live near City Park. When I talk about, just considering the historical context for the waterway, the historical context that we've really considered is the intention to be to create that mountainous landscape, the intentions that Deboer noted about that Box Canyon area being the mountain landscape. And I know that was a time when it was like City Beautiful was a big thing. And we like to say it's City Beautiful, now City Ecological. And because that's, people still want it beautiful, but they also, there's a way to make things beautiful and also be ecologically sustainable.
Thank you.
I don't know if that answered your question.
Well, yeah, no, it did very much. And thank you. I know we looked to the Denver Library historic pieces and some of their drawings for Washington Park, and that's why I was asking. Secondly, one of the concerns, and I totally, two concerns. One is that lining the lily pond and filling it in. Our lily pond is a youth fishing area, and I don't know if it looks like it might be a little bit bigger than yours, but not totally. What we were told clearly was that we could not put lilies in the lily pond unless we were willing to take them out and store them to put them in the next year because of the concern of contamination downstream on the Platte River. And I don't know if that was something you came in contact with.
Yeah. Okay. Do you want me to finish that? Do you have a second part?
But the question is, the decision to fill it in is curious. I don't know what the use of the lily pond is currently. And the question of filling it in that had to be a hard decision because it's definitely a very important aspect of that. And like I said, because we're at the beginning of that water that travels along City Ditch path, even though it's not City Ditch water anymore, it's able to support if we artificially put fish in it in the spring. Talk to me, was that even in the consideration of what you were doing?
Yeah, so I can speak to the regulation. So, and some of you may already understand this, so I apologize if I'm explaining something you understand. It was news to me. And there was a lot we had to consider around how we used the water from Farrow Lake, or where the water came from. Let's see, let me try to get this straight. You cannot introduce certain treated water or potable water into the system if it's going to end up in the Platte. There's a regulation. It starts with it's like regulation B9 or something. Like they kept saying this like regulation. There is some regulation about the way that water has to be treated or can't be treated to go if you know it's going to end up in the plat. And we dealt with some of that too, because the water path that we have, it actually does, it kind of loops around up Farrow Lake and then it goes back into Farrow Lake. And so if we wanted to use that pathway, we had to be really thoughtful about how we did or did not treat the water. The lily pond itself, so it sounds like your lily pond is holding water. The reason, this is like, I learned so much in this project, the reason that Deboer waterway was shut off originally like 10 years ago is because there are multiple cracks in the lily pond itself in City Park. And so it was basically flooding underneath the lily pond. It was creating a situation underneath the lily pond, I guess. And so the lily pond just kind of became a kind of marshy, stagnant place that was most recently has become super beautiful again because of the work of City Park Friends and Neighbors and City Park Alliance to bring an art installation into the space. So right now the lily pond's super beautiful because there's an art installation, but before that it wasn't holding water. And so it sounds like a slightly different situation if the Wash Park lily pond is holding water.
I think it is. We have another question. If you don't mind, Cindy, we'll go on
Fine, please
a little
do.
further. Helene? Helene, you have to unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to say, Jacqueline, I'm not really familiar with the project, but it looks really, really good, very interesting, nicely done. And I like your emphasis on the ecological aspect. That's really good. I like the photovoltaic cell on top of the shade. That's all really great. I noticed you mentioned in passing something that caught my ear, which was the mention of a pollinator garden. And this is a lot of interest to me. I work with a pollinator group, and we have been sort of back and forth with Parks and Rec about the pollinator gardens that they are planning for City Park, Sanderson Gulch, a lot of places around town. We found out, maybe inadvertently, that they would be using herbicides to establish and maintain those pollinator gardens. And so we've approached Parks and Rec about that. And we're meeting with them on the 22nd of February to try and help Parks and Rec find a way to develop these gardens without using poisons. So I'm just curious if that's something you would take into consideration, since you mentioned that a pollinator garden may be part of this project, that it be established and maintained without herbicides and pesticides.
Yeah, I'm glad you're bringing that up because that would be a no-go for the museum. I think so. Our one of our vice presidents is a native bee expert. That's what she's our curator. Yeah. So she, Gabriela Chavarria, is our vice president of the science division at the museum. We have 4 vice presidents and she's one of them. And that's her specialty. So she's deeply, I mean, we're all deeply excited about the idea of a pollinator garden. Of course, if you poison the pollinator garden, you actually kill the things you're supposed to be helping. So that would be a non-starter for us.
Right.
So I'm glad you're bringing this up. I will check back with my team at Denver Parks and Rec and make sure that that's somewhere in our agreement. We are also thinking deeply about how we engage volunteers, so community volunteers. So, you know, they could care for the garden. They could allow people to adopt the garden and care for the garden, and engage people who are interested. So
absolutely, and we would be interested in you know, being involved in that in whatever way we could, and that's what we proposed to Parks and Rec about Sanderson Gulch. Exactly.
Okay.
For citizens who are knowledgeable about pollinators and permaculture and organic gardening, et cetera, to help and assist and help maintain. So that was our thought.
That's good to know. Thank you for bringing that up. And I will talk with them in the context and just bring up that I think I've told everyone that I was going to be at this meeting tonight. So that's on the minds of people.
Great,
Is it
thank you.
Was
Thank
it
you.
Helene? Helene, is
Helene.
that
Mhm.
Helene? Okay,
Yeah.
thank you, Helene.
I can get you her contact information if you like, or exchange both of you together, introduce you through email.
That'd be
Yeah,
great.
and I'm happy to share my email with all of you too. So if anyone has any further questions.
Sonia John has a question.
Should mute.
Yeah, hi, everybody. Sonia John with Friends and Neighbors of Washington Park, same as Cindy. And this may go without needing to be said, but I hope that the people that you're working with at DBG and also Parks and Rec are all up to speed on the problems that could be caused by the lower quality of the water, recycled water. It particularly affects conifers, many of them native species. And so it's important to avoid putting something in that's only going to last for 5 or 10 years.
Or 5 minutes.
For 5 minutes, yeah. Jackie, have you discussed this particular issue with the folks you work with?
No, by lower quality water of what do you mean?
Well, it's recycled water, which is about 6 times higher in sodium content and in chloride content than the potable water. And in contrast to what's being used in other parks, including the Pinetum, which was always kept on potable water, which you probably are aware of. So with the sodium and the chloride, we've had a lot of problems with keeping the trees alive in the parks that have been converted to recycled water.
Okay.
So-
So yeah, we're not going to water. So the irrigation system as it stands will still irrigate the area. And I know that I did ask about, there was at one point, we had a discussion of what water is in the irrigation system, and there is a desalinator in the water for the irrigation system. And then the Pinetum, of course, we're keeping on, the museum has a potable water line that goes to the Pinetum, and that will stay potable water. And then the water that will be in the waterway will not be necessarily to irrigate. It'll just be a channel that will come up from the from Farrow Lake up to the top, and then we'll run back down. But it won't be used to water the space. It won't be used for irrigation of the space.
Well, I'm not so concerned about what's going to be flowing in the channel itself as the water that's being used to irrigate the land surrounding the project. And if you're going to be putting in more trees, which it sounds like you will be, deciduous trees, for example, seem to have a pretty good resistance to the salts in the water. It's a particular series of species that have been used historically here in Denver that have shown the most sensitivity to it. Ponderosa pine and blue spruce and white fir are particularly affected. So I'm just assuming, I mean, maybe I shouldn't, but I hope it's true that DPG or DPR and DBG are totally aware of this. We've had a committee working on this for about how many years? 5 years?
100 years.
Jay?
100 years, I think 100 years, and
100
Jacqueline-
years and 100 trees.
Jackie, just so you know, Sonia has been working on the problems of the city's irrigation to the trees for many years. She's been working on Washington Park, Cheeseman Park. I can't even count some of them that you've been working on, but she's our resident specialist. You can see some of the things that she's written if you even Google her in Westward.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah.
I was not aware of that. I do know that we just discussed today, we're going to add an arborist to our budget, an independent arborist, and anywhere there's, just to review the project independently. So that is good to know that there are some existing issues with the irrigation that currently is. Is that, I'm understanding that correctly? The current irrigation has some limitations even with the desal?
Well, I heard you mention desalination, and that made my ears perk up immediately because I don't understand what system that is and to what extent it would be effective in removing sodium from the recycled water, because sodium is really, really hard and expensive to get rid of from water. As you know, desalination plants on coastal areas, it's highly expensive, and Denver Water has ruled out pretty much using that sort of system here to clean up our water. So
It's a process that happens in the Elephant Pump House in City Park. Is the desalination process happens before the water goes to irrigation out into the park, is my understanding.
well, we've heard promises of that sort of thing being employed in the pump house that pumps the water out of Smith Lake, which is analogous to Farrell in its role it plays in the irrigation system in the park. And it really hasn't made much of a difference. So I
Good to know.
encourage you to look into the science of that and the actual data of water quality.
That is good to know. Thank you. I will, I've made note. And again, I'll share my email address so that we can all stay connected. It sounds like there's so much to stay connected on with so many of you.
There is. Sonia, I'm going to move on to Cindy, who has her hand up in the air. If all of you have questions, please put your hand up. Cindy, you need to unmute. Cindy,
Mute. There we go. I'm so sorry. Thank you. I thought I was being so good about everything here. Thank you. Those are, guy, this is such an exciting project, and I'm very, very excited about it. And I know that Sonia and I and Washington Park feels sort of like a sister park to City Park because the water comes through our park through City Ditch, and it's very exciting. Two things came up to mind. We are another issue. We are having the beginning of planning of a small playground refurbishing. And I'm very excited about the partnership that you and the city have and the 50-50 participation of costs. I have two questions. What is the cost? What is the estimated cost? Because it's never quite right. And second, do you by any chance, with the partners that you have worked with, are those all paid for, or any of those the participants giving gratis, or whatever that word is? Jackie.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. We did have a possible partnership at one point that we considered that they would do in-kind work. And we asked to not go that direction because we were concerned that when you have an in-kind partner, that they drive too much of the project, and that we wanted to leave the community's voice as the driver for the project. And we didn't want to end up with something from an in-kind partner that was a gift, but it wasn't quite the gift that everyone wanted. So we decided not to go with an in-kind partner, but I know that there are organizations that would partner. And to answer your question about the project funding, so the total cost from beginning to end, everybody's involvement is we have a not to exceed $6 million. And I think to that point, we have spent, I think of that 6 million, 4 million is construction. So the design, all of the work to get to construction is about 2 million.
To a follow-up question to this, have you already, has it already been chosen who the design team will be?
Yeah, we signed with the design team in September. And then we started working on that infrastructure piece of it. So the design team is DIG, And they have sub-consultants that include Moeller, AE, Bean and Stock, Pinion, Biohabitats, and then coming, that used to be Project One is our project management contractor. We don't have a CMGC on board yet. We're about to put out an RFQ for a CMGC.
Okay, perhaps I don't know what a CMGC
Oh,
is. but-
sorry. I didn't either before this project. I apologize. It's a, it's a construction manager, general contractor. Construction manager, general contractor. So it's a general contractor that helps manage the construction, and they take, they help with all the pricing and budgeting and all of that stuff. So we want to bring them on soon so that we make sure we don't exceed that 6 million or 4 million for construction.
And to clarify, you're putting in 3 million, the city's putting in 3 million. Were you personally, since you are very engaged with this, did you sit in on the selection of the dig people? And was there a presentation? Who else was sitting in on that presentation?
Yeah, I did. And the contract for the design is directly through the museum. I had alluded to the fact that Denver Parks and Rec was willing to allow the museum to drive the design, with the premise that we really wanted it to be community-driven design. So we sat in on the selection committee. And so it was a few folks from the museum and a few folks from Denver Parks and Recreation. And then there's like a score sheet, and everybody has to score on all of these different things that are related to the project. So we put out a request for proposals, and then we scored people against those things. Like one of the things was how community engaged is the design firm, and how open are they to iterating on community feedback, was like, just to give you an example.
And Jackie, thank you very much. I had the privilege of sitting in on one of those, and I felt very special. And I am just a community member, and I was wondering, and I'm going to put you, I don't want to put you on a spot, but don't you think that it would be helpful to have at least one community person, not involved with the parks, not involved with the money, but just being a community person to sit in and hear the process and be able to share that with other people?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's anything that anyone has against that. I don't have anything against that. I think from the perspective that we were looking at, there was a lot of technical stuff with all of the engineering in the waterway that even sitting on the process, the landscape architect that we had to choose had to understand all of these technical aspects. So this felt like I know that we're seeing like the kind of outcome of the non-technical aspects of the project, but the waterway made this an incredibly technical project.
Yes. And thank you very much. I'm finished.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. And, I think this has been very productive. Since I've been trained by Cindy, I'd like to be able to go to our next topic. I've really enjoyed having you here, Jacqueline. I hope that you will come back and visit us again as far as this project, because I can see that there's a lot of unanswered questions, or maybe even questions that people will start to churn up in their brains and want to ask. So I see that you put your email in the chat, and I will publish that chat when I publish this in our notes. I really appreciate you coming.
Thank you. And thank you. I know I took a lot of time, but I'm definitely available.
Not too much.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you all. Thank you for watching over our parks, by the way. I'm just so grateful. The more I get into this and realize how many people it takes to watch over our parks. Thank you. Because I know it takes a lot of time and energy.
Thank you, because as a person who lives near City Park and has watched some of this happening, I really do believe that one of the first times this has been community driven. And this is how that Denver Parks and Recs should take its marching orders. So thank you.
Thank you. I am definitely available for any sort of offline chats, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you. We'll
Thank
see.
you. Good night.
You can stay on if you want, but
Oh, can I?
hungry. Yeah,
Oh, I
sure.
would love to stay on.
Oh,
No.
please do.
Okay.
Are you there?
Hello?
Hi. You know, next up is Brad, who's going to be talking about the recent designations of the parks. These are big things that you probably can think about, Jackie, because part of this is City Park Golf Course as far as a designation. Something that seemed to slip through the designation process in the 1950s, as I understand it. And now with building the drainage ditch in City Park, they suddenly realized it's not designated. We could do anything we want. Go for it, please, Brad.
Okay, Maggie asked me to kind of give a brief report, about 15, 20 minutes. And I've also, Jay Rust and Kathleen Wells are on this, and we have been the intrepid INC Park Designation Subcommittee going back almost 8 years. It's kind of shocking that we've been kind of plugging away at this so long. But there are some interesting sort of issues, and I'm gonna try to plagiarize using a deep Parks and Rec presentation. And let me see if I can do this, Maggie. There. Now let me get it moved back up to the right location in the presentation. So this is what Parks and Rec presented before PRAB, went up to Ludi on City Council. But I just want to quickly make sure everybody sort of understands when we talk about park designation what this is. Back in 1955, the city amended the city charter and created this thing called park designation. And at that time, every park that was already in the city's park portfolio was automatically considered to be, quote, designated. And then the idea being that after 1955, every park that was created and came into the city system needed to be designated by ordinance, meaning that city council had to pass an ordinance and designate. So now, and the important thing to realize with designation, the only thing it really does, it doesn't speak to how Parks and Rec manages our parks or mismanages, as sometimes may be, but the only thing it really says is before the city can endeavor to sell or lease or transfer a designated park, there has to be a vote of the people. And so that's the only really thing that a park designation means, is the people get involved in deciding about the real estate. Now, the reason that's important, we all learned back in 2013 when the city arranged a land swap with Denver Public Schools for a little portion, about 10 acres of Hensel Park down in the southwest corner of the city. And we all started learning a lot about park designation then, because Hensel Park had not been designated. And so there was really no ability to get a vote of the people on the matter. And so as a result, about 10 acres were carved out, and we now have a Denver Public School on what used to be parkland. And there was a lot of hue and cry, I'm sure, as most of you remember, on that, and folks, had a lot of discussion. And I will give some credit to the Hancock administration that they said, okay, fine, we'll start up the process of designating parks, of moving through city council ordinances and starting to work on the portfolio. Because what we learned back then in 2013, I should say, was that only about 68% of our parks had been designated because a very long time had gone by and there just hadn't been any. And some of them are really big ones. Like at that time, Ruby Hill Park hadn't been designated. There were just a lot of surprises. So the city started up the process, and Parks and INC, sent off a request. And so Jay Rust and Kathleen Wells and I, and there were a couple of others way back then, started getting involved. And, Parks has been plugging away on it. They are now, as you can see, on their 12th round. They just finished their 12th round of park designation. Just very first part of January was when the packet that you see is that was finally enacted on. And part of that, just for some background, what Parks does is they want a very detailed legal description of the property. Sometimes they do survey work to decide what the boundaries are. And it takes them quite a bit of time and effort. And so the result has been, it's been a fairly, plugging process going along. So, this is some of the history. Again, this is a Park and Rec thing, and I'm not going to go through all of this. I kind of talked about it. And they talk about the design, the designation criteria. Again, I don't want to review this, and I'm going to actually kind of talk about at the end how it's kind of evolved. But here you can kind of see they started back in 2013 with 68% of the parks only designated, and round after round they've been plugging away. And I think the statistic now as I go down here is that about 82% of our park system is designated. Now, it's important to understand that there are some parks that just aren't eligible for it. And a good example is the Kennedy Sports Complex. It's about 40 acres down by Cherry Creek Dam. And Denver does not actually own the fee title to that property. Instead, it's actually owned by the Army Corps of Engineers and is leased to Denver. So that's an example that there certainly are some parks that just are not eligible. And but certainly we have others. And this again, just a quick, this is from their presentation. It shows the different council districts and park designation districts. So this is the map of what is currently designated and not designated. Now, and remember here, the red showing the non-designated include the 6 parks that we're going to talk about here in a minute. So you can see that there are a lot of areas, like for example, up here, I think is my cursor showing up? It shows up on my screen. North Central Park up north of I-70, there's a bunch of the new parks there that have been coming in that haven't been designated. We have a lot of sort of the gulches and drainage ways that are not completely, this is Highline Canal. A lot of that stuff is really a lot of real detailed survey work and pretty difficult. So example, here's the brand new 39th Avenue Greenway that just came in. So, there's still some opportunities out there. And then now we come up, these are the ones that, as I said, were just the very first part of January, City Council enacted them. And there's kind of some interesting issues embedded in these, and I'll talk about them as we go through. The first one, Maggie alluded to, and here's just where they're at in the city. You can kind of see them. But the first one Maggie alluded to was a portion of Park Hill, Freudian slip there, City Park Golf Course. And, what happened actually, the Parks Department, I think, had always assumed that all of the golf course here at City Park was part of that pre-1955 class. You see at the very far west end here, they actually had done a little designation of some portion that they bought. I think historically there was a gas station or something. But when they went to put in, the city went to put in the stormwater detention facility here at the west end, litigation ensued. I think I saw Woody Garnsey was on this, and Woody Woody's one of those folks, but through the crucible of litigation, why the city discovered that, well, guess what? You know, this big section of the golf course had actually been leased to the city back in 1955 from the state, and fee title didn't actually convey over to the city until after 1955. So it was an example, and when it was discovered in the litigation, Parks Department said, hey, don't worry, we'll make it whole. You know, don't get too worried about it. And lo and behold, they did. It has now been designated. And the point on this is, you know, the city doesn't always completely understand the ownership of its parks. They think they do, but this is a clear example where they thought that all of this had been owned by them back in 55, and they realized, you know, that, oh gosh, there was a flaw there. So you never quite know when some of these might pop up. But the next one is a great example. This is the unnamed Stanford and Baltzan Park. It's way down in the southwest corner of the city. This was designated in January. And I'll tell you the little interesting history on this was originally Parks and Rec proposed this for designation about 6 years ago. And, you know, we got it and we talked about it and they were putting it on to move it forward. And then it came back and said, oh no, sorry, we've got to pull that because we've realized that there's this area here in the middle of this park, it's about 10 acres, that's basically used for stormwater detention. And so at the time, Parks and Rec said to us, like, oh gosh, you know, way too many issues involved with, you know, what was then called public works, and we just don't know quite how to do it. And so we just don't think we can designate this park. It's just too confusing. So we talked about it quite a bit back then, and, you know, to kind of move forward in time, the whole issue of stormwater detention in City Park Golf Course, a portion of which, of course, even back, you know, if you can see here, not all of it was undesignated. This area over here was still always considered a designated park. And so the argument was made back to them. It's like, well, okay, if you can put stormwater detention in a designated park, why can't you designate a park that already has stormwater detention? And, you know, Parks and Rec, to their credit, they thought about it quite a bit and they said, you know, you're right. And so they started going through, and we had a number of parks actually. Northfield Ponds up in the North Central Park area was a classic 33-acre park that they initially said, oh, we couldn't possibly designate that. That's got stormwater detention. They even Westerly Creek Park there in Central Park, but you know, they kind of realized that, you know, they were able to work things out. I believe my understanding is they've got some sort of memo of understanding between the two city agencies so that Public Works, Dottie is still now responsible for, you know, their stormwater detention and all that. So they really did much to Parks and Rec's credit, they kind of evolved on this, and we've really seen them come forward. And so this unnamed park is a great example where they designated even though it's got stormwater detention. So moving forward, this is a little tiny addition. It's this area here, only a ½ acre. They call it the Martinez. Let me get it down here so you can see it. The Martinez Park Edition. And it straddles Lakewood Gulch, you know, which has got, you know, water flowing through it. And, you know, sort of the interesting background on this was, again, as Parks was working on designating the much larger park of Lakewood Dry Gulch, they had to do a lot of survey work and really kind of understand it. This was about probably 4 or 5 years ago. And in doing so, they realized that there was some city lots that were adjacent to that park that they really didn't consider part of their park, you know, portfolio at all. And they came to our designation committee. We talked about that, and you know, we looked at it and it kind of made sense. But the one that was identified was this little thing here, which had not really been considered part of the parks portfolio, but was owned by Denver Real Estate. And we said, well, that's fine. You're giving up some of these others, essentially putting them back in the real estate portfolio for all of Denver. But what about this thing? There should be a park. And it took a while, but there was discussion, and Denver Real Estate agreed. And so finally, they designated this little thing. And as you can see, there is additional. I mean, Lakewood Gulch continues on up. Haven't gotten much clarity as to who might actually own some of the property to the west of this little thing, but in any event, they designated it, and though only a half acre, it certainly accomplished something. So then moving on, the next two are sort of interesting in that they kind of show the new parks out in some of the new areas. We've got what's called First Creek Park, which I think is only, let me take a look at my notes here. I think it's only about, First Creek Park is only about 6 acres. It's this red area here. Adjacent, this is what's called First Creek. And I believe this portion here had already been designated. And then if you see right over here, this little red portion here on the other side of Tower Road is this thing. First Creek Village open space. So both of these are good examples. They're up in Green Valley Ranch, very new. If you take a look at this one, let me go back. I hope I'm not making people seasick with moving this around. You can just see how new the subdivisions are around these areas. They're still really being constructed out. And Denver has been adding in parks. Of course, how this sort of works is I don't believe that Denver actually paid money for the land itself, but instead, as part of the development process, when the property is subdivided and whatever part of their agreements, the developer agrees to build out a park, convey it to Denver Parks and Rec, and of course Parks and Rec takes over operation and maintenance. So these are good examples, and as I showed earlier, the North Central Park area has got a lot of this going on. Then the final one of the 6 is perhaps, I think, the most interesting. This is they're calling the Cherry Creek Open Space. And to kind of give you a little orientation, Iliff is kind of right here at the bottom. And here's Jewel. And of course, this would be the Cherry Creek bike trail that goes along. And this whole parcel right here was owned by Denver Water. And interesting, in fact, some of you may remember the Hensel Park actually had originally been owned by Denver Water 50 years ago and had been conveyed to Parks. But anyway, apparently Denver Water was finally saying, well, we need to do something and move on. So this kind of got divided up. This parcel, this triangle right here, is retained by Denver Water. And reportedly there are, I think, 3 wells that are still on it, 3 alluvial groundwater wells that apparently make some portion of the Denver water system supply. And then this is actually right here at the southern line is the city and county of Denver line. And so this is Arapahoe County down here. So Arapahoe County got this, and then this portion was coming to Denver Parks. Now, if you go out there today, this has been the site of a giant construction project, Urban Drainage and Flood Control, which is a separate governmental entity, has come in and completely re-engineered this whole area. The creek has been rebuilt. I mean, when you out look at it, you will see. I mean, everything virtually has been changed and being rebuilt. And so that's one of the interesting aspects of this, because often we in the park designation subcommittee had heard that, well, boy, Parks and Rec didn't really want to ever designate something until it was pretty much all landscaped and perfect, and it was sort of ready for them to call it a park. And this is clearly an example where they jumped forward and decided to do it, which I think is fantastic. But then the other interesting thing, and I just have to point it out, is the urban drainage project actually continues on. This is Cherry Creek, and of course, Cherry Creek flows off to the northwest. Continues on. So this is Jewel, and the actual construction project goes all the way up to Quebec, which is quite a ways up. And so it kind of led to a natural sort of question of like, well, okay, you're designating this, what about this stuff up here? And of course, this stuff up here had already been owned by Denver. And, you know, it prompted an interesting discussion with no great resolution as to perhaps why some of our riparian areas along Cherry Creek and the Platte aren't perhaps, you know, being identified more clearly as parks. But in any event, you know, in the interim, why this new area here, it's about 19 acres, is going to be one of Denver's newest kind of parks. So I just want to finish. I do have another slide. If I can pull it up, let's see if I'm able to do that. Here we go. Folks who went to the PRAB meeting last week heard about this. It was a little bit in the press, but we'd heard a little bit of that at our designation committee meeting. But Denver is in negotiations to accept the donation of a brand new mountain park, 450 some acres. And you can't probably read this terribly well. The little red outline shows that it's up actually kind of on the Gilpin County, Jefferson County line. And the PRAB board last week did vote to endorse it. And so they're moving the donation process forward to city council. But pretty exciting thing. And the interesting thing is front and center to what Parks was telling PRAB about is that, by gosh, as soon as this is donated and the fee title has been conveyed, why we will designate it, and it will become a designated Denver park. So anyway, with that, I'd open it up to any questions or comments. And Jay and Kathleen, I don't know if you want to chime in here with some stuff too. Anyway, that's kind of it. I think I kind of ran through it quick, but Maggie's request was brevity. So these are our newest designated Denver parks. So I think I see Cindy has her hand raised. I don't know. Or Kathleen.
Jay. Jay Rusk, awesome.
Okay, Maggie, do you want to take it from here, or?
Let's go in order. I think I saw Cindy's hand up first. So please, Cindy.
First of all, thank you so much to the whole committee, you guys, and as always, your presentation is so in educational. I think this is a piece that we really, really, really don't appreciate the importance of what could happen to this land if it wasn't designated. I see. On that south, and I lost the video part of the visual part of this. In that southmore part, that triangle, okay, there's one piece that was going to be designated. And are you saying that that triangle is still part of Denver Parks and Rec, Brad?
Okay, I think you were talking about the very last slide we had of the Cherry Creek open space. Is that what you're talking about, Cindy?
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so are you talking about the portion then north of what was designated? Is that what
The northeast section that is not encompassed in your red line, is that
the little triangle, the gray
yes.
gray triangle that's there? Yeah, and
Brad, you can still
oh,
share.
there it is. Okay, this one. You mean this area here?
I'm sure you understand. Yes.
Okay, that is, my understanding is that is still owned by Denver Water. And they wanted to retain it because they have some alluvial groundwater wells on there that apparently they take water out and put into our water supply system. So that's still owned. Denver Water had owned all of this and they retained ownership of that. And then Denver City got this green stuff.
Is there any possibility to own? Wait a minute. Let me rephrase this question. Does Denver Water, once they have either taken on the water that they need, yada, yada, do they then put their water up for sale? Because the question is, could the city of Denver or the Parks and Rec Department negotiate that upper right-hand triangle without the, and there's some piece of this without whatever goes underneath the ground? In other words, can we make that a bigger green area?
Well, Cindy, we kind of learned about this when it was a fait accompli. I don't know what sort of negotiations went on between Denver Water and Denver Parks and Rec and Arapahoe, but I think the desire, from what I understand, is that Denver Water wanted to retain ownership of all of it because they still have some of their groundwater wells on it. So now who knows in the future if they discontinue using those alluvial wells, if there'd be the possibility, hopefully, I don't know. But this taking, because originally Denver Water owned this entire thing, and then it's basically been broken up into these 3 parcels.
Brad,
With Arapahoe County taking this.
Brad.
Thank you, Brad.
I stopped your sharing, but if you want to show that piece, just start sharing that.
Oh,
again.
I'm sorry. Has no one seen it? Well, that's,
No,
sorry. Let me, sorry. I missed that critical step of doing the sharing. Sorry. Okay, does this make more sense in my explanation then? This
Yes.
is the little portion what Denver Water owns that Cindy was talking about.
Thank you, Brad.
All right, Kathleen Wells, did you want to chat a bit? You have to unmute.
Yeah, just a quick note on the process that we've been through over the past 8 years. We have endeavored to meet with them consistently with detailed suggestions and comments. And I think it's been somewhat frustrating because of the slowness of the process. But the persistence, I think, in the end has paid off. And it's our hope for the future, meaning between now and the end of the Hancock administration, to really push as much designation as we can get through under the rubric of a kind of legacy statement on the part of the administration. So that's the framework we're operating in for the next bit. We're also reaching out to the Parks Department's relatively new program and resiliency to see if we can think through some ways of framing our interests and designating as much as possible in terms of that new program.
thank you.
Jay,
Are there other questions?
Jay, did you have something you wanted to say? You need to unmute. You need to unmute, Jay.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, good. It has been a laborious process, but also a very productive process. We've made great headway on designating properties that are now officially parkland that cannot be just developed or sold without a vote of the people. And we have raised a lot of questions and interests on segments of properties that are adjacent to current parks or not, that has produced a productive way of honoring that they should be part of the park system. So even though we've made a great deal of headway over these years, we still have a lot of work to do. And I honor the commitment of Brad and Kathy Williams to get Kathleen Williams to hang in there
Wells.
with us to work on making the best efforts that we can for the city and county of Denver to protect our green space by designation. Thank you, Brad.
Yeah, and just again, I just want to say, I really do want to compliment the Hancock administration and particularly Scott Gilmore, because they really have moved this forward. And Scott has probably been the single person in the Parks Department who's kept it going forward. And and of course, I know not everything Parks and Rec does is always popular, but this really has been, I think, one of their better things. And we hope that in the remaining couple years of the Hancock administration, they may try to accelerate it. We hope. We'll see. Any more
Brett?
questions?
So,
As a
Brad.
last comment on that, am I still here?
Yeah.
As a last comment is because we as citizens, the city and county of Denver with designation of our participants in designation, we've held our feet to the fire.
so Brad, I had a question about the Cherry Creek north of what was designated. And I understood you to say that Denver owns the land along Cherry Creek.
Yes.
What's the potential for that being designated parkland?
Well, well, first of all, one of the things we learned in this process, and this is because Parks brought in their surveyor, and we kind of got to know, but back about 100 some years ago, the city and county of Denver went through and purchased the Platte River, its banks, and likewise Cherry Creek and its banks. Because it isn't just a given, if you go out, in the countryside, rivers are basically, a lot of them are on private land. But the city made that decision way back in about 1910, and I think it was a fairly lengthy process with a lot of condemnation, whatever. And so the surveyor has really helped us to understand that. And that parcel that I was talking about, Greg, when you go out and look at it, it's being basically renovated. And I have no idea exactly when Denver acquired that, but they do. But there's a reluctance, I think, to do designation on some of our riparian areas. We actually had a discussion with Scott Gilmore last time about that, kind of pushed him a little bit. As a lot of folks here will know, parks, they've got trails on all these riparian areas. They basically have enforcement responsibility for policing in terms of illegal activities. They've got a lot of authority on them already. But there's a real concern that somehow the operation and maintenance for these riparian areas would prove to be overwhelming. So I don't know. I had, again, it's a classic example where, one side of this line at Jewel Avenue, they've designated it. On the other side, it's just, I don't know what they'll call it. It'll be, who knows? So, one could hope maybe that they would start. I personally think that there's a real value from clearly identifying our riparian areas as parks. It sort of changes how people think about them. And particularly since the city and county of Denver owns them anyway. But it does make Scott Gilmore and the Parks Department very nervous. So,
Thank you.
Do we have any
Lydia-
other questions? Kathleen, I see your hand up. Do you? You have to unmute though. That's part of it.
I'm sorry, I don't know why that hand is still there.
Okay.
all right. Well, hey, if there's no more questions, thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much. There's been
Thank
a
you.
request that there be an update on Park Hill Golf Course. So I see you, Woody. You'll have to unmute. I know that there's a political thing going on. Bear in mind that we're a 501c3, so we really can't take a position now that you're putting something on, or looking to put something on the ballot. But I know people want to hear about this.
Sure, I'd be happy to. And first of all, thanks to the incredible work on the park designation from that committee. I know that's been a labor of love, and it was shocking when we discovered in the city park golf course litigation that northern portion actually wasn't designated. And at first the city pushed back on us, and finally they realized that was kind of silly. And but it's still taken 3 or 4 years since then to get it designated. But thanks to all of you. Yeah, I'll try to be very brief, but there is a continued big fight to preserve the open space of the Park Hill Golf Course land. It's 155 acres, as you probably know. It's now owned by a real estate developer who bought it for a song and would make a fortune if they can get rid of the existing conservation easement. We now are characterizing this as a joint venture, joint real estate venture between Mayor Hancock's administration and the developer to get it developed and get rid of the conservation easement. So there's several prongs to what we're working on right now. The latest one is that we formed a committee that got a ballot language approved for getting petition signatures for a matter to go on the ballot in November. We have to collect 8,265 good signatures by the middle of June. And everybody who's done this before knows that you have to collect a lot more than the needed amount because a lot of them get thrown out. So frankly, we were looking at trying to collect about 10,500 signatures between now and the middle of June. And we have a volunteer effort that's building up to do that. It's a strong group of people who are leading that effort. And we have hired a professional company that collects signatures, and we're having to raise money to pay for that. So that's part of what we're doing. And you may have heard that the city has launched a formal planning process for the land, despite the fact that it's protected by a conservation easement. And under the amended Colorado Conservation Easement statute that was amended effective June 30th of 2019, that land and that conservation easement cannot be terminated without a court order. And the court order has to say that based on changed conditions on or surrounding the land since the current easement was created, which is actually July 11th of 2019, it's become impossible to continue the conservation purposes of the easement. And we've been pushing back ever since the beginning of, actually the end of 2019, after the real estate developer bought the land, asking the city how they plan to deal with the statute. And we've repeatedly been completely ignored. They won't tell us. The last thing we heard from the city was when there was a presentation by the planning department people at the Greater Park Hill community meeting a few weeks ago. And the same question was asked, basically saying, please tell us how you plan to deal with the statute, because you're about to spend a whole lot of money on a planning process and drag citizens through a very energy consuming planning process for land that can't be legally developed. And you got the cart in front of the horse. You should first go to court and see if you can prove that you can meet the statutory requirements. And literally they won't answer us, except 3 weeks ago. Finally, when we pushed, we got an answer that just blows my mind, which was, here we are, citizens and taxpayers, and their answer in writing was that this is protected by the attorney-client privilege, and we won't tell you, which was politically very astounding. We're not in litigation with the city. We're just taxpayers and citizens trying to understand why our taxpayer money is being spent on this expensive planning process when you can't develop the land without a court order. So what we're doing as part of Save Open Space Denver is engaging as much as we can in that process. We've sent a long letter to the mayor and the other officials involved on February 5th, to which we again haven't received a single word of response. And that's a pretty outrageous piece of this whole thing. It's one thing for them to go ahead and have this, what we're calling a real estate joint venture with the developer, but not to share these kind of critical pieces of information with the citizens is really outrageous. So anyhow, we're doing those two things primarily right now, and we've got an increasingly exciting group of people who care about this issue. Georgia and I have talked a lot about how wonderful a group it is that's been fighting for 4 years on this effort. And people come every week who care about the issue and want to jump in. So if anybody is interested in helping on the petition effort, we have a new website which is called Yes for Parks and Open Space. Actually, it's yes. Maggie, what is the actual?
Yesopenspace.org.
Okay, yesopenspace.org, and there's a
Yes.
donate button on there. We're needing to raise money, and if you have friends and family and neighbors who care about this issue, would love to have financial support, and anybody who might be willing in this COVID environment to help us on petition effort. We've got some wonderful people who volunteered, and it's a challenge because we can't do it the way usually you do this. But we're doing our best, and I think our volunteer effort hopefully will bring us the extra signatures that we won't be able to get through the paid effort.
Thanks, Woody. Some of you may have forgotten even that the Park Hill Golf Course came to light because of the work of this committee. We're the ones who brought it to the forefront. We're the ones who made the issue. Thank you, Brad, for doing all the documentation. This was something that our committee brought this through, and we should be so proud of what we've done. Do you have any questions?
Hey, Maggie, I do have an unrelated matter that I think
Sure.
folks might find interesting. It's not really park designation, but it will eventually. But kind of watching city council and whatever, kind of watching this most recent park designation go through. I saw an ordinance and we then for condemnation authority, and we then had a discussion with Scott Gilmore about it, but it's really quite amazing. The city is actually exercising its eminent domain authority to acquire some parkland along Sand Creek, sort of sandwiched in next to I-70. And I'm sort of amazed at it because, to me it says, and this kind of goes back to the Park Hill Golf Course thing, when the city decides they want to apply, their resources, they can. And the parcel in Sand Creek is relatively small. I think it's only like 17 acres, but it was sort of critical to fill in the Sand Creek open space thing and to provide some public access. And I have not seen a single thing about that in the media. It's very interesting. I think the city has decided they really wanted to keep it kind of quiet. Obviously, the individual who is the subject of the condemnation action knows well about it. But so it's really pretty interesting. And I wish the city would be more forthright, because let's face it, if they decided they wanted to take the reins there from the developer of Park Hill Golf Course, they could do it. They've got incredible powers.
Yep.
So I just mentioned that. It's kind of interesting, and maybe we'll see it in the press soon about Sand Creek.
Yeah, and just one more thing, Maggie, I know the meeting's gone on a long time, but on the acquisition, our position at Save Open Space Denver from the beginning has been that our goal is for the city to acquire the land for a designated park. And that purchase price would be the fair market value of the land as encumbered by the conservation easement, which actually was appraised about a year and a half ago when the city was doing the stormwater drainage project at around $3.8 million. And so it would be quite a bargain for the city to acquire that. The city can't pay more than fair market value for it. And so our push is to preserve the conservation easement, number one, and number two, to do what the PRAB voted on some 6 or 7 months ago, I think now, to urge DPR to be poised to acquire the land for the fair market value once we can preserve the conservation easement.